I can't describe the pain I felt when my own son looked me in the eye and said I was too old to make any decisions about my own life. I didn't respond not because I was scared, but because the humiliation left me speechless. I just lowered my head and went to my room to talk to God. And right there between silent tears, I asked for just one thing, Lord, if there's truth hidden in this house, show it to me. I wasn't expecting anything, but just a few hours later, the truth knocked on my door so hard that my son's pride crumbled in an instant. My name is Margaret, I'm 72, and I've never liked depending on anyone. I used to laugh when people said getting old meant getting weak. I did my own laundry, went grocery shopping, and still cared for my violets like they were my children. After my husband passed, yes, loneliness came, but not like a monster. It came like a quiet visitor I learned to live with. My days were simple: hot bread in the morning, walks with the church lady's prayer as the sun went down. No luxuries, but there was dignity. And I've always believed where there's dignity, there's strength. My son Lucas kept insisting I should move in with him. He said it was safer. I told him safety for me meant knowing where every plant in the garden was. One day he got serious. Mom, we're going to get your life organized, okay? I knew he meant well, but there was something in his tone like I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I felt caught between affection and a prison. A prison without bars, just too many pillows, too smooth walls, too much silence. Eventually, I gave in. I brought my things, my Bible, my old radio, and I went. Claire, my daughter-in-law, welcomed me with a quick smile and a kiss on the cheek. They showed me the room, tidy but impersonal. Everything was beige. A beige that felt like it was trying to silence me. I draped my shawl over the chair, but it didn't help much. The house smelled different. There was no scent of my life there. Deep down, I knew that this act of love was hiding a need for control. But I chose to believe that with time, things would settle. In the beginning, they treated me like a guest in a fancy hotel. You don't need to cook, Mom. Let us handle it, Mom. I smiled, thanked them, but inside I felt more and more like I was being replaced. Even my prayer routine seemed to make them uncomfortable. When I tried to light a candle, Claire said, "We have kids in the house, mother-in-law." I swallowed the words and smiled. Nobody forbade me from living, they just quietly pushed me into a corner. With time, I started noticing what wasn't being said. The chairs that kept me out of conversations, the polite but tired looks when I shared my thoughts. One day I took my old sewing scissors and cut a button off my blouse on purpose, just so I could sew it back, to remind myself I was still useful. Sewing that button gave me more peace than any of the care they offered. That's when I realized the problem wasn't aging, it was being treated like I was no longer here. Small decisions started being made for me. It began with breakfast. I always ate oatmeal in the morning. But one day I found a plate with yogurt and chia seeds. "This is better for your digestion, Mom," they said. I smiled but left it untouched. I went to the kitchen and made my oatmeal. When I came back, Lucas shook his head and muttered something about stubbornness. I smiled again. No one noticed that oatmeal was what was left of me. Another time, Lucas cleared my closet of all my floral dresses. Said they were old. He replaced them with plain shirts and baggy pants, more practical, he said. I took one of those dresses and held it close. I smelled the lavender from the days when my husband and I used to go to the park. That dress wasn't just fabric. It was memory. It was history. I wore it under one of the new shirts and no one noticed. But I knew. I refused to be erased without a fight. Even the living room couch got rules. One day I sat down to watch my show and Lucas said that was Ethan's spot, my grandson. I stood up, looked him in the eye and said, "Sorry, I forgot I'm no longer part of the decor." He didn't catch the sarcasm. Claire gave a nervous laugh. I went to my room. I sat there staring out the window like someone looking for a way out of a world that closes in on you with good intentions. Even my faith was questioned. One stormy night I suggested we pray together. Claire just looked at me. "Let's leave that for your church." Okay, that wasn't a no. It was a warning. A silent message that my spirituality was inconvenient. I went upstairs, knelt in the dark, and prayed quietly, "Lord, if I'm overreacting, correct me, but if there's truth hidden here, show me." It was a short prayer, but I felt like someone up there was listening. The invisible fences turned into walls, higher every day. I started waking up earlier just to feel the house in silence and remember I was still there. I made coffee, sat alone, and watched the sun slip through the window. That was the only time I felt like the house could still be mine too. But for how long? Something was about to change. And without knowing, I was about to discover what had been hiding behind so much care. Every time I tried to give my opinion, something shifted in the air. A quiet weight dropped into the room. It was like my words brought dust, like speaking was a bother.
Once I made a comment about how we used to raise kids. Lucas cut me off. Mom, that's old school. Claire just scrolled on her phone.
I felt like a card left out of the deck, but I kept trying even if they only listened out of politeness.
When Lucas mentioned tearing down the old garage, I reminded him it still had his father's tools.
He snapped, "Stop trying to control everything." That line hurt more than a slap. I wasn't trying to control.
I was trying to protect.
There's a difference.
A quiet but deep one. And no one there seemed willing to understand.
I turned around and did the dishes. Let the running water wash the tears I didn't let fall.
One afternoon I mentioned I'd been feeling dizzy. They said it was probably just old age. I asked to see a doctor. Lucas said he was looking into it, but nothing happened. I felt like I was being pushed into some invisible corner.
Like my pain no longer counted.
Deep down, it felt like my existence was being managed like a dormant bank account.
During a talk about the kid's future, I suggested keeping the oldest in the same school.
Lucas said, "Things are different now, Mom, trust me." I did trust him. But trusting doesn't mean staying silent. It doesn't mean giving up your voice. When you're a mother, you learn to listen. But aging shouldn't mean being ignored.
And by then I wasn't being heard. I was just being tolerated.
One night I sat in the backyard and looked at the sky. I saw a shooting star and thought, has respect become a luxury? I closed my eyes and prayed, let me be seen, not as a burden, but as the woman who built this family. I had no idea the answer would come sooner than I expected.
That afternoon felt ordinary, but the air was heavier.
I pulled out an old folder with my husband's documents. Inside were papers from the cooperative where he worked for over 20 years. Something in my heart said, keep this close. I went downstairs holding the folder. Lucas was on the couch, Claire folding laundry. I said, "Son, I need to talk to you for a second." He didn't even look up. "Go ahead, Mom." I took a deep breath.
"These documents are important. I want to keep them." He laughed, a short, cold laugh. "Mom, you're too old to make any decisions." That hit me like a punch.
I froze. Claire stopped mid-fold with a child's t-shirt in her hands. Time stopped. One sentence, that's all it took to shatter my entire world. I, who had been an advisor, a wife, a mother, was now disposable.
I didn't cry. I just breathed deep.
My hands were shaking, but I said, "All right, son." I climbed the stairs with the papers in my arms.
Every step echoed the pain.
In the room, I shut the door and sat on the bed.
The folder slipped from my lap and the papers scattered.
My Bible fell open onto my knees. The verse in focus seemed to look right at me.
"Lord, if there's something hidden, show me." That was my prayer, quiet, honest, from the deepest part of my soul. I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for light. I asked for justice. I asked for dignity. I closed the Bible slowly, like someone closing a wound.
But God had already heard. And what he would do next, no one in that house could have imagined.
I didn't know it yet, but that very night something unexpected was on its way. Not a dream, not a hunch, a truth.
A visitor. A step toward a miracle. My face was burning.
Not from shame, but from something deeper. An old pain only a child's humiliation can cause. What hurt most wasn't the words, it was how he said them. Like it was an absolute truth. Like my time had expired.
The room went silent, but it wasn't the healing kind.
It was sharp, heavy silence. Claire looked down.
I held the documents tighter, trying to keep it together. I breathed in.
Smelled the fabric softener on my blouse. It grounded me. I just said, "All right, son." I walked upstairs slowly.
Every step was a silent prayer. When I reached the door, my knees gave a little. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to understand how we got here. When did being a mother start meaning? I couldn't decide anything anymore. I looked at my hands. They were still trembling.
I looked around the room. Everything felt too calm.
Too cold. Too neat. Like life had been drained from it and replaced with a catalog.
I picked up the Bible from my nightstand and opened it without thinking. It landed on a passage about Revelation.
I smiled through teary eyes. I closed my eyes, placed my hand on the page, and whispered, "Speak to me, Lord." Downstairs, I heard footsteps. Fast ones. Doors opening in a rush. A muffled voice, maybe Lucas talking to Claire.
I couldn't catch the words, but I felt the tension. Like something was shifting.
Like my prayer had stirred something unseen. A light breeze moved the curtain. Something was coming, and my heart felt it. Outside, the sky was darkening. Light streamed through the blinds in golden stripes. I sat still, listening to the house breathe. The clock read almost 7. Claire came upstairs but didn't knock, just passed by.
They were nervous.
The movement was subtle but clear.
Something was off or about to be set right.
And somehow I knew God was preparing an answer. Night fell heavy like the sky pressing down on the roof. The tension in the house grew by the minute. The hushed voices, the whispers, Lucas pacing, it all felt like something was about to break. I grabbed my crochet blanket, the one I used the day I got the call about my husband, and wrapped it around my shoulders. That small act gave me strength. It felt like wearing my story. I went to the window. Saw Lucas in the yard on the phone. He was pacing like a caged lion. Claire walked down the hallway carrying folders. Something was definitely out of place. The peace of that house, even if it was fake, had vanished. In its place, a sense of alarm, like a secret was about to come to light. I sat on the armchair by the bed, pulled my rosary from my coat pocket, and began to pray. The beads slipped through my fingers like sand. My words were quiet but steady. It wasn't a desperate prayer. It was surrender, faith, because something was in the air I couldn't explain but recognized. When God begins to move, hearts grow restless before the truth arrives. Suddenly I heard a knock at the front door. Sharp, 3 knocks. I waited for Claire or Lucas to answer. Nothing. Another knock. Louder. I stood up and stepped into the hallway. The house felt frozen. Even the ticking clock sounded louder than usual. Lucas appeared in the entry, tense. He opened the door. A man stood there. I only caught a glimpse of his serious face in the folder in his hand. Something told me this wasn't a regular visit. Lucas tried to speak, but the man said, "I'm looking for Mrs. Margaret Hayes." That woke me up. Someone was asking for me. Directly. No middleman. My heart raced. I walked down slowly, holding the railing, bracing myself to hear something I never imagined. The image I saw when I entered the room was strange and powerful. A man in a sober suit standing firm with steady eyes, holding a dark folder close to his chest. He didn't seem in a hurry but left no room for doubt. Lucas stepped forward, but the man cut him off firmly. "Ma'am, please." Claire stood behind the door, barely breathing. I walked closer. The man greeted me with a slight nod. "Mrs. Hayes, I represent an agricultural cooperative called Santa Helena. Your husband, Mr. Benjamin Hayes, was connected to it for over 20 years. I'm here about an investment he made in the past." My throat went dry. He opened the folder and pulled out a few documents. His hands were steady and his voice calm and direct. "These papers should be in your possession. But our records show recent activity in your name." My legs weakened. I sat down slowly and took the papers carefully, like I was holding an old truth. I began to read. My name appeared over and over. Contracts, authorization statements. All under my name. Investments made by my husband with automatic renewal. And more accumulated funds, stocks, an account that had grown for years. My heart tightened. That money was mine. And someone had tried to touch it. I looked at Lucas. He was pale, hands in his pockets. Claire had her hand over her mouth in shock. The man concluded, "Mrs. Hayes, there were attempts to alter access information. Everything indicates your son tried to take control without proper authorization." The world froze, but inside something in me woke up. That room, which once felt so empty of me, now pulsed with a truth no one expected. I looked back at the papers. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about trust. It was my husband saying, "Even after death, you still matter." It gave me a different kind of strength. A quiet fire that burns deep. Lucas tried to speak. Opened his mouth twice, but no words came. Claire, on the other hand, began to cry. She sat at the edge of the sofa, staring at the documents in my hands. The house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Truth had walked through the door, and there was no ignoring it. The cooperative representative remained composed. "Everything will be handed over officially tomorrow. But it was important you knew today. And directly from me." I nodded. "Thank you," was all I could say. Lucas rubbed his face, unraveling not from guilt, but from the truth he could no longer hide. Claire stood slowly, placed her hand on my shoulder, and said with teary eyes, "I swear I didn't know. But I saw the way he talked to you. I should have done something." I looked at her, touched her hand, and said, "When truth knocks on the door, no one needs to explain." She broke into heavier sobs. Lucas lowered his head. Something shifted right then. Like a curtain had fallen. Like the dignity they tried to hide had finally come home. I didn't yell, I didn't confront. I just breathed. Because when truth comes from God, it doesn't need to shout. It just enters. And when it does, it changes everything. The man at the door looked at me with respect. Not pity, not condescension, just respect. That alone undid something in me. It had been so long since someone treated me like an adult, like someone who mattered. When he asked to speak with me directly, Lucas tried to step in. I'm her son, I can help. The man raised his hand, she is the account holder, and looked at me with firm kindness. My heart pounded. I came down the stairs as if each step was a statement. I left the cane behind. I wanted to step firmly. When I reached the room, I extended my hand to him. I'm Margaret Hayes. He nodded respectfully like I was someone important. It reminded me of when I organized church events, ran raffles, helped neighbors with donations. I had a voice. And in that moment it came back. He explained everything calmly. That my husband had made an investment with the agricultural cooperative decades ago. That the returns had been reinvested automatically. And that by policy only I had access to it. But recently someone tried to change that. My eyes went straight to Lucas. He looked down, unable to deny it. The folder was laid out on the dining table. There were receipts, records, statements. I read each line with trembling hands but steady eyes. It was more than money. It was justice. Dignity. Proof that I wasn't disposable. That my husband had trusted me until the end. I held the edges of the papers like holding a newborn. Claire stepped closer like she was walking on glass. She looked at me with guilt and compassion. Lucas paced the room, lost between shame and fear. The man stayed standing, waiting for my decision. But all I wanted was to breathe and understand what this truth would mean moving forward. With the documents spread on the table, time stood still in the house. The ticking clock sounded like drums. Lucas paced back and forth, mumbling. Claire sat frozen like a child caught red-handed. I sat down, breathed deeply, and flipped through the pages again. It was real. And I wouldn't ignore it. These documents are clear, Mrs. Hayes said, the representative. There were 3 attempts to change the account holder in the last 6 months. All from this address. Lucas swallowed hard. Claire finally sat across from me. Margaret, please forgive me. I thought something was off, but I never asked. I squeezed her hand without a word. Sometimes forgiveness begins with a gesture. Lucas stopped behind the chair, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. Mom, I just wanted to help. Just wanted to organize things for the future. The words hit my chest like a stone. Future. They were talking about my future without me. Like I no longer belonged in it. I looked up at him. I saw a boy. Lost, afraid, desperate. Anger rushed through me like a strong wind, but it didn't stay. In its place came a quiet emptiness. It didn't hurt because of the money. It hurt because of trust. Because my son had tried to erase me from the life I helped build. But still something kept me from yelling. Maybe it was love. Or faith, or years of prayer that taught me to answer with wisdom. The representative concluded, you are the only legal authority. Any other attempt will be blocked. Everything is in order now. I nodded. I placed the documents back in the folder with care, like gathering an inheritance of immeasurable value. Not financial. Spiritual. It was God saying I saw it all. And now I'm setting things right. Lucas sat on the couch like he had taken a punch to the stomach. Red-eyed, breathing hard. He tried to speak, but no words came. Claire went to him, touched his shoulder, but he didn't respond. I remained seated, watching every detail. The wrinkles on his forehead, the shaking hands, the way he bit his lower lip, just like when he was little and knew he'd done something wrong. Mom, forgive me, he finally said. His voice soft, muffled, almost childlike. I was scared. Scared I couldn't take care of you. Scared you'd get sick. Scared of losing you. And I understood. Behind the control was fear. But fear that chose the wrong path. The path of silence and force. I stood and walked to him. Sat beside him. Placed my hand on his knee. Son, you haven't lost me. But if you keep silencing me, you'll lose yourself. He looked at me with teary eyes and rested his head on my shoulder like he used to when he scraped his knees. We sat like that for a while, breathing together. Claire knelt beside us, held my hand tightly. You still have a place here, Margaret. And now I see we pushed you away. It was the first time I heard the right word. Pushed. Because that's what they had done. Slowly. But now it was coming back. Not through magic. But because truth had broken through the silence. In that silent embrace, a new chance began. It wasn't total forgiveness yet. It still hurt. But there was room to rebuild. And when there's room, there's hope. And where there's hope, faith finds a way to bloom again. It was a beginning. Something different. Something fairer. The next morning, Lucas woke me up early. He came into the room like stepping into a church. Mom, want to go to the bank? I nodded. He waited with the documents in hand. On the way, we didn't talk much. But in the car he kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something but didn't have the right words.
I just observed. Every gesture.
Every pause. At the bank he made a point to sit next to me, handed the papers to the clerk and said, "She's the account holder. Everything must be under her name." The manager looked at me with surprise, then with respect. Right there in front of everyone, Lucas was giving back more than documents. He was returning my voice. My autonomy. My identity. When we left, he took me to a coffee shop. Ordered a latte and 2 pieces of toast. "Want sugar, Mom?" That simple question made me smile. He was learning to ask again. To include. To respect. Claire showed up with the kids. Ethan ran up and hugged me. "Grandma, are you coming to school today?" I laughed. For the first time in a long time, I truly laughed. That afternoon he cooked dinner. Rice, beans, and sautéed beef. Simple. But he invited me to sit at the head of the table. "This is your place, Mom." No speech. No audience. Just us. And that table for the first time felt like mine too. I picked up the spoon, made the sign of the cross, and thanked God. For the meal. For the courage. For the justice. That night before bed I looked in the mirror. I saw wrinkles, yes. But I also saw steady eyes, squared shoulders, a soul that refused to be silenced. God didn't just show me the truth. He gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost: the right to exist with strength, and to be heard even after 70. It was only when I looked at Lucas calmly that it truly hit me. It wasn't about a harsh sentence or a bank account. It was something deeper. He didn't just want control. He wanted me to fade quietly without conflict. To vanish like a candle no one blows out, but no one fuels either. The most silent pain is this: when you're still alive, and they treat you like parts of you are already gone. Lucas sat across from me like he was finally seeing me.
"I swear I never meant to hurt you."
His voice sounded like a child's. The same voice that used to call me queen of the house when I baked sweetbread. But I was scared. Scared of seeing you suffer, scared of losing control, scared of not handling it. He took a deep breath. "So I started doing things without you." I listened calmly. No rush. Hands folded in my lap, eyes on him. I didn't interrupt. Because sometimes the one who made the mistake needs to hear their own words out loud. When he finished, I waited a few seconds before responding. "Son, I understand the fear.
What I don't understand is the silence. The erasing. I'm your mother. Not a porcelain doll you keep safe on a shelf."
He started crying again. Not from shame, but from surrender. A cry of someone who knew there were no more excuses. Claire walked in with a glass of water, handed it to him, and sat beside me. "We never realized we were hurting you." She held my hand, but we did. And in that confession, something broke. But not in a bad way. The kind of breaking that allows something to be rebuilt. I got up, walked to the shelf, and picked up an old photo. Lucas as a child, hugging me tight on his. I handed it to him. "You protected me so many times. You stood up for me at the grocery store when someone cut in line. Said I was your hero. You just forgot heroes don't disappear. They endure." He smiled through tears. And I saw the strength he'd lost start to return. The representative was still in the room, quietly watching, like someone respecting a sacred moment. When he saw things had settled, he asked to leave. "Mrs. Hayes, any future transaction will require your direct authorization." He stood, adjusted his tie. "You have full control. If anyone tries to act without your permission, it will be considered illegal." The word illegal echoed through the room like a silent siren. Lucas's eyes widened. Claire wiped her face, visibly shaken. And me, I just nodded. Because in that moment there was nothing left to say. Justice had already spoken. And when justice arrives, it doesn't shout, it declares. I walked to the door with the representative. He handed me a card. "If you have any questions or if anyone tries to contact you, call me directly." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for treating me like a person." He smiled. "You're much more than that." Then he left. I stood there for a few moments, staring at the empty street. The tree on the sidewalk swayed in the wind. Even nature seemed to know that something had shifted. When I came back into the room, Claire had already picked up the documents. Lucas stood staring at the photo I'd handed him minutes earlier. He gave it back gently, like he was afraid of breaking the memory.
"I remember that day, Mom. You taught me how to face anything."
I smiled softly. "Then learn again, my son. Because now you're the one who needs courage." That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and repeated in my mind, "When truth knocks, no one needs to explain."
That was it. I hadn't defeated anyone.
God had.
And when he wins, no one can stand against the truth. Truth doesn't barge in. It arrives as a guest and stays as the owner of the house. I woke to the sound of silverware in the kitchen. For a second, I thought it was a dream. But it was Lucas in an apron stirring coffee, Claire slicing fruit. The smell was familiar, the scent of home. Not just a place you live, but a place where you're expected. I sat on the edge of the bed, put on my slippers, and walked slowly to the kitchen. Lucas turned and gave me a sheepish smile. Morning, Mom. Want toast or grilled bread? I smiled, surprise me. He laughed. Claire came over and said, today you don't lift a finger. Just sit. She gently pulled my hand. I sat at the head of the table. My seat. A seat that had been empty of me for months. During breakfast, they talked about taking the kids to school, fixing up the garden on the weekend. They asked what I thought about rearranging the living room. Every sentence felt like an invitation. Like they were saying, come back. And I did. Not out of pride, but because love, when it matures, learns how to return. After breakfast, Claire and I did the dishes together. While drying a plate, she said, I've always admired your faith. But now I get it. It's not about religion, it's about strength. I placed a mug on the rack and answered, faith doesn't stop pain, but it keeps us from giving up in the middle of it. She paused, looked into my eyes, and smiled through tears. That afternoon, I went to the backyard to clean my flower pots. Lucas showed up with a basil plant. Thought you'd like this. I took it, smelled the leaves, and said, my husband used to say basil smells like a new beginning. He sat beside me in silence for a few seconds. Then he said, let's start over, Mom. And with dirt on my hands and a clean heart, I answered, let's. The change wasn't sudden. It was like a stubborn flower blooming even in dry soil. In the days that followed, Lucas started truly listening. Not pretending, listening for real. He began asking me to help choose groceries, to share opinions on the kids' rooms. When he saw me reading, he'd bring a blanket. If I coughed, he made me tea. Claire changed too. She started hugging me for no reason, inviting me to go out. Talking to me woman to woman, not superior to outdated. One night she brought a box of old photos and we sat together in the living room. Tell me the story behind this one. And I did. Each photo was a memory recovered. Each story, a brick in rebuilding our bond. Even the kids began seeing me differently. Grandma, did you ever fall off a bike? Grandma, did Grandpa ever have a beard? And I laughed, answered, even made up stories just for fun. We were finding our way back to each other. And I realized that sometimes faith doesn't turn a house into a castle, but it turns hearts into a home. One Sunday, Lucas called me into the garden. I want to show you something. He had placed a wooden sign in the big pot by the gate. It read, here lives Margaret, woman of faith, strength, and hope. I read it through blurry eyes. You're our roots, Mom. We just forgot for a while. My eyes filled. So did my heart. I didn't answer with words. I just hugged him. A full hug without hurry. The kind that heals invisible cracks. Life would still have ups and downs, I knew that. But something was solid again. The foundation. The dignity. The voice. God didn't just reveal the truth. He restored my place. And a restored mother can move mountains with her heart. I sat beside him, placed my hand on Lucas's knee. He was vulnerable, no masks, tears still fresh. Son, you haven't lost me. But if you keep silencing me, you'll lose yourself. The words came out of me like a quiet command from someone who knows. He cried harder. Rested his head on my shoulder like he used to as a child. We stayed there for a few minutes, breathing together in sync. Claire joined us, sitting on the floor beside the couch. She touched my arm gently and said, forgive me too. I saw how he talked to you and still stayed quiet. I should have done something. I squeezed her hand softly. Daughter, when truth knocks, no one needs to explain. It speaks for itself. Lucas lifted his head, face red, and said, I'm going to change, Mom. I promise. You deserve everything. You deserve respect, a voice to be heard. I smiled gently. I didn't want promises. I wanted actions. But I knew something new was beginning. Something that with faith could bloom. Justice had begun to restore love. Claire asked us to pray together. The three of us held hands right there in the living room and said a simple prayer. We gave thanks for the truth, for the second chance, for the courage to admit wrongs. And we asked for wisdom not to repeat them. When we finished, the air in the house felt different, like the weight had been lifted off the walls. I looked up at the sky through the window. The moon peeked out from the clouds. I closed my eyes and gave thanks. Because God didn't answer with thunder or punishment. He answered with love and justice. And when he moves, nothing can stop him. I felt something had been healed in that house. And even with scars,
The heart now beat with hope. The next day, Lucas woke before me. He knocked gently on my bedroom door. "Mom, want to go to the bank?" I put on my nicest outfit, the one Claire said was out of style, and went with him. In the car, he kept looking at me through the mirror like he had more to say but couldn't find the words. I let the silence be a bridge, not a wall. At the bank, he handed all the documents to the clerk. "I want to make sure everything's in my mother's name." The young man looked at me respectfully. "Mrs. Margaret, it's a pleasure to help you." I smiled with dignity. I was treated as the account holder, as it should be. Lucas stayed by my side the entire time, without speaking for me, without interfering. Afterwards, we went for coffee. I ordered buttered bread and drip coffee. He got the same. "Remember when you used to take me to the bakery every Saturday?" I laughed. "And you'd get sweet bread with icing and still add sugar to your milk." We laughed together. It wasn't empty nostalgia. It was a real reconnection. A restart over simple cups. Back home, Claire and the kids were at the table. Lunch was rice, beans, fries, and chicken and sauce. "Today, it's Grandma's way," Claire announced. They called me to sit, and for the first time, Lucas said, "Head of the table. That's your seat." I didn't give a speech. I just sat down, picked up my spoon, and gave thanks in silent prayer. It was more than a meal. It was the symbolic gesture that I was back. Not as a guest, not as a patient, but as a mother. A living part of that house. A woman of faith who endured being forgotten. And was remembered. Because when God restores, He doesn't just return what was lost, He gives back more. The days that followed were like watering a dry garden. A little at a time. Lucas listened more. Asked my opinion. Included me in decisions.
Claire changed too.
One day as I folded laundry, she took my hand and said, "Let me do it today. Go rest." I felt cared for, not managed. The kids came to me more. "Grandma, can you help me with homework? Grandma, tell me what it was like when you were little." I felt needed again, not out of duty, out of love. I started sewing again. Made dish towels with flower prints. Claire put them all in the kitchen. "Now it feels like a real home," she said, smiling. Even my room got a makeover. Lucas and Claire asked for my input. They changed the curtains, added a reading chair by the window, brought my plants, and a small wooden sign that read, "Faith lives here." I cried. Not from sadness, but because my space finally had a name. And that name was Margaret. I had visits from church friends. One of them walked in and said, "You're glowing." I replied, "God didn't forget me. He was just waiting for the right time." She smiled, hugged me, and said, "God also used you to remind the world that mothers aren't accessories. They're roots." That stayed with me. Since then, my mornings have tasted like purpose. I still tend to my plants. Still read my Bible. But now I do it knowing that my voice is heard. That my presence matters. And that no matter how much they try to silence a woman of faith, God always finds a way to place her back at the center of the story. If this story touched your heart, I ask you one thing: subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because sometimes we need to hear stories like this to remember who we are. Sometimes all it takes is a reminder that we're not alone. That even when injustice knocks first, truth still gets the last word. This channel is more than stories. It's a place for faith, strength, courage, justice, hope. Every video here is made with love to remind you that God still works. That miracles still happen in silence. That mothers still matter. And that new beginnings are possible. Even after 60, 70, or 80. Do you know someone who's also being silenced? Share this video with them. Maybe they just need a little push to take back their life. A gesture, a word, a prayer. Sometimes that's all it takes to turn everything around. And if you've been through something similar, leave a comment below. Share your story. Let's build a chain of faith, healing, and connection. Because stories like mine aren't rare, and together they grow stronger. When the world tries to silence us, God sends the truth to knock on the door. And it always comes in.